Well, I think one of the most dire situations for women around the world right now is obviously in Afghanistan. I'm sure you've heard that girls there are not allowed to go to school, that they're now being, women are being prohibited from getting divorces. I mean, you can't even go to the park as a woman. So you're imprisoned in so many ways. And that's the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. And of course, the Islamic Republic of Iran has similar type laws against women, such as the hijab laws, which I'm sure everybody has heard about by now. I hope they've all heard about by now that women need to wear their hijab in a certain way that is deemed, appropriate by the religious police. Otherwise, the women will get imprisoned, beaten, tortured, raped, and sometimes even killed. And then, they can't even ride a bike. Riding a bike is criminal in Iran. Singing is criminal. Like the things that we don't even think of as rights, but we just think of as normal human functions are prohibited for women, criminalized for women in a lot of these Islamic theocracies. So I think on a global scale, there are a lot of issues that are affecting women in a lot of different ways. Here in the West, the erasure of women is a major concern. But for me and the work that I'm doing through Free Hearts, Free Minds and through Forgotten Feminists, and just my focus is mainly on women in not only in Muslim majority countries, but women from those communities, because quite often the same issues that you're seeing happening in Afghanistan are also happening in the UK or in Canada or in the US or Sweden, because the people who have this mindset don't change their mind when they change their geographical location. They bring these ideas with them, and they treat their daughters and their sisters, or their wives in the exact same way.
Right.
So that's where the focus of my work is these days.
Obviously, for those that usually watch this program, we don't take a stance usually on foreign policy. But it's interesting that you bring up Afghanistan. Afghanistan for a long time, we were trying to mold into I guess you could argue, more secular country than it was when we arrived, fighting the Taliban for years upon years until we pull out. The United States, at least, pulled out in August of 2021. Do you think that it was a mistake for the United States to pull out the way that it did, seeing that Afghanistan overnight turned, into an Islamic theocracy, into, Talibanistan overnight, immediately prohibiting women and girls from attending school, immediately disregarding all the work that we did to try to make Afghanistan a peaceful and more secular and enlightened place to live in. Do you think that we should have stayed? That there could have been a different plan? Because I know also right now we are supposed allies with the Taliban. I guess you could say they're the enemy of our enemy, since they're fighting ISIS also there. Do you think that it's, and this, I guess, another follow-up question, do you think that it's a waste of time for us to be quote unquote allies with these people, when even though they might be fighting a similar enemy to us, they still stand for the same dogmas?
Yeah, absolutely. It's just a slightly different kind of terrorist.
Mm-hmm.
That's the difference between the Taliban and ISIS. They're following very similar dogmas. They have slightly different ways of going about it.
Yeah.
There are a lot of questions in that. You asked me a lot of questions in succession, so I'm going to try and touch on most of them. First and foremost, yes, I do think that the way that America left, of course, was quite drastic. I wish that it had been more planned. It wasn't quite so chaotic. But I don't think that America would have made much difference staying there much longer. I don't think that it was. I think leaving was the right thing to do. It was just the way that they'd left. And part of the reason why staying there for 20 years and then leaving, you didn't really see that significant of a difference in the country, is because of what you just identified there. We are allies with the Taliban. That's the problem. The problem was that even while we were there, the work wasn't being done the way I think it should have been done, the way most enlightened, rational thinkers think it should have been done. For example, I'm sure you heard of situations like the bachabazi, which is something in Afghanistan. It's a systemic rape of little boys. And when the American soldiers would speak to their supervisors or their superiors about that, they were told not to say anything and not to intervene because it's their culture. And so it doesn't matter if they stayed there for 20 years. It doesn't matter if they stayed there for 200 years. If you're not doing the work of actually trying to enlighten this group of people, then you're not going to get anywhere. As long as you keep on saying it's their culture and we will ally with them, then I don't know how
Right.
you expect any progress to happen. But we see the same thing happening here on our soil. You see, like, I think there's obviously a significant difference between how we're going to treat Afghans or Taliban even in Afghanistan versus how we would treat the exact same situation happening on Western soil.
Right.
But unfortunately, even here, we have the same appeasement. We see the same capitulation. We see the same tropes of it's their culture, it's their religion. We have to, accept it. And that, I think, is very, very dangerous. Cultures don't progress unless there is criticism and unless there is reason to grow. A very drastic example I'll give you is Saudi Arabia. They continued to have slavery until the 60s. And the only reason why they stopped was because Britain said, we're not going to help you get that oil out of your ground unless you prohibit slavery. And so, they were forced to do that, not because they wanted to, not because it was a value that they agreed with, but because that this would allow them to get oil and to make money. So there has to be pressure against barbaric practices. We can't just say, oh, it's their culture. And if we want to do business with Saudi Arabia, then we have to accept they buy and sell humans. It's their culture. We can't do that.
No.
Right. And unfortunately, there's so much of that going on. And that's basically the subtitle of my book.